Okay, so welcome back to another deep dive video. Today I'm going to talk about specifically for Singaporean applicants like myself, because these were some of the things that I didn't really understand back then. Because just for some context, a lot of admissions for the US is a lot more complicated as compared to like Singapore universities and maybe UK universities to an extent. I think for Singapore universities, as long as you hit like that cutoff point, then you probably would get in. And then if you want to apply for like the NUS Merit, Global Merit, SMU Global something, or NTU, whatever global scholarships that they have, then I think you have to be the top of your cohorts, maybe like 90 RP, 88.75, 43, 44, 45 IB. And you need to write like some essays, but I think it's I mean I don't know how the admissions process is like there, but I think it's more a lot results oriented for just getting into the course and getting into the scholarship. For the UK, I mean the Singapore education system is sort of based off the UK. It's a lot more academic. You do a lot more research. You can't switch majors, not like the US where it's like a liberal arts curriculum where you can like freely swap and learn whatever you want. And it's also very results oriented, but with a bit more ambiguity because you have like an interview and like an essay. But it still cannot compare to the US, which is very wide. Technically, like there's no results cut off because I mean at the end of the day it is a holistic and individualized consideration review. So I'm gonna start with I guess module one. Is this not really a module, more just part one? But I had some points I wanted to mention, and after I used like AI to go and reorder it to make it look professional, and this is what came out of it. So this is the rules of the game for Singaporeans. I think there's two applicant pools in reality when you're a Singaporean applicant. The first is the full pay pool, means you can pay it's about $500,000 for the whole 4 years at the US. And if you're like me, you're seeking need-based financial aid, then this is really there's really a very big difference in terms of the uh application acceptance rates. So your ability to pay determines your competition. So the reason why I split into Vanderbilt and Swarthmore is because I asked a lot of these questions to uh Dr. Hoffman, who is the former like Vanderbilt admissions officer and Swarthmore international director. So a lot of the things are said like in his context, but I asked it for mainly for Singaporean applicants. So and the system works very differently at different schools. So Vanderbilt's a need-aware school, meaning to say that if you apply for financial aid, they will take it into consideration. And usually it's like the average acceptance rate for financial aid students is a quarter. For international financial aid students, is a quarter of the overall admissions rate. So international students are like halved. And then if you're looking for financial aid, it's like you halve it even more. So it becomes like a quarter. So at least for Vanderbilt, full pay international students compete in a general pool, often against domestic US students. So that means that you are basically put against you're actually fighting against US domestic applicants, and usually then that usually gives you like a better advantage because international students generally have better results. You're mainly fighting against the spots for more competitive majors like econs, computer science, physics, engineering, a lot of the more STEMmy subjects, which is like usually what full pay international students would apply for. Because if you're paying $500,000, you wouldn't want to take a degree in I don't know, like religious studies and women's and genders and sexuality studies. That's not really something that makes sense. So it's not like a guarantee. It's not like you have a very high advantage. You have a pretty good advantage because your international standards are usually higher, but it's not very big because you are still fighting in STEM, and a lot of applicants in general just want to go into STEM. But for Swarthmore, it's a bit different. Full pay students compete for not 1,000 spots. So this is a small error. I think this is basically saying that there's like about 1,000 applications for full pay international students, and it's reviewed by territory. So by whatever regional admissions officer is there at the time, who is reading all the applications. So what this just means is that, okay, so for Swarthmore, there's actually about half of the students are about on financial aid. So there's like 60 students, international students in Swarthmore, and it's like there's a very general breakdown of like 35 on full pay and about 25 on financial aid. So actually this 1,000 number might not be correct. So best to just ignore it. But the main difference is that Swarthmore you're competing with the full pay international pool, whereas in Vanderbilt you're competing with the domestic US pool. So even in and this is not really this is a very uncontrollable factor. It really depends. Different schools have different ways of evaluating applicants. So some of them they value full pay international applicants as like a domestic student, and then places like Swarthmore they really section it out and they review it by territory. So if you're seeking financial aid like me, it's a very very bad look. Usually what happens is, this is the statistics given by Dr. Hoffman, who was the international director at Swarthmore at a few years back. He says that 3,000 international applicants compete for only 25 funded spots. So that is like 0.83% acceptance rate. So those are very bad odds, like really bad. And so what is the implication? That applying for aid moves you from a competitive pool to a near impossible one. So I mean, if you're seeking financial aid and you're applying to the US, it's not that it's impossible. Nothing's ever impossible, but it's just so rare and so difficult because just the number of spots, especially at the Niederware Liberal Arts College, there's just so many applicants who are like shotgunning everywhere. But you know, there's only so many people that they can take. It's not that need seeking applicants are unqualified. It's just that there's just so few spots and the budget is just so limited. And specific to Singapore, there's this, right, Gemini calls it the Singapore Subsidy Effect, but essentially Singapore sends a healthy number of full pay students, and this wealthy demographic softens the budget impact for the region, sometimes allowing the community squeezing 1-2 financial aid spots beside them. However, these spots are often prioritized for high need regions like Africa or Latin America. So basically, you can sort of squeeze in, like usually they'll try to admit like maybe 2 full pay students and 1 financial aid student because they can use the full pay to offset the financial aid student. But this is quite rare. Usually, if you apply for financial aid from a very high income place like Singapore, more likely than not, your spot is given to high need regions like Africa, Latin America. So this is really, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of like the class shaping process. So like where the aid money is going to be distributed towards, because at the end of the day, like you only have 25 spots, you rather give these 25 spots to the people who actually need it, where you actually need people from, which is, and usually these colleges have like a global, they want as many people from different nationalities as possible. So they will pick people from like South America, Latin America, and Africa. So there can be years where just in general, there is no spot for like a Singaporean financial aid student. So what it means is that when you apply in, your application is kind of dead on arrival because there's just no more budget. There's just no more budget for you. And it's also how compelling your application is. If your application is not compelling, it's just like a normal application, then honestly speaking, it's you're really there's no point in applying. So you have to really compelling to get that one spot out of 3,000 international applicants, and it's really very difficult. Okay, the next point is the small school paradox. It's easier to get into a small LSE than Harvard. The reality is that if you need financial aid, the opposite is true. It's actually much harder to get into the arts colleges like Swarthmore, Williams, and Pomona, than compared to Harvard. Like what I mentioned, Swarthmore is only about 25 out of 3,000 spots. 25 funded spots worldwide out of 3,000. Whereas Harvard's playing field, or like, well, let's just use Princeton because I remember their numbers off the top of my head. It's like 210 accepted, 180 enrolled, and about 9,800 applicants. So Princeton has a 2% acceptance rate. But then again, Princeton is need blind, and I mean, Princeton is Princeton. So, the level of applications that you get at Princeton and the volume is just much more higher because they don't factor in financial aid. Whereas, even though the pool at Swarthmore might not be as strong as Princeton, but with only so many financial aid spots that they give to the whole world, you really have a very tough hill to climb. It's not impossible. The application just needs to be really very strong on has to be firing on basically all cylinders. But it's honestly speaking, if you're on financial, it's just more difficult to get into a liberal arts college than compared to a big research university, because the research university has sort of the space and the budget to offer you that spot, assuming that you are a very strong student. Whereas even if you're a very 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 strong student, sometimes there's already two Singapore full pay students. They don't need another Singaporean student because they've already filled like that diversity quota. And especially if you're on financial aid, then they don't need to give it to you. They much rather give it to another region or give it to someone else. Okay. So on that other point, there's also point number 3. So geography, class shaping, and 3 buckets. So applications are read by your regional admissions officer, and they're read by they're read by your citizenship. So I think a lot of people make they make this wrong assumption that, like, oh, because 2 people from SGI got into Dartmouth, that means that they prioritize SGI. No, that's just not true. It just so happened that year there was a Singaporean applying ED and a Malaysian applying ED. So there's 2 different nationalities, and so the pools are completely separate. It just so happens that, and I'm quite sure this also happens at other top schools. Like, yeah, you have a lot of very strong international students who are not Singaporean applying. So it seems like, that year, oh wow, 2 people from RI went into Harvard. But then when you actually look at the citizenship, it's like, 1 Singaporean and 1 Korean. So these are actually, even though they come from the same school, they are 2 fundamentally very different candidacies. And the advantage kind of goes to the Korean person because, like, they have a very diverse worldview because, let's just say, like, they grew up in Korea and after they moved to Singapore. So, like, they have the worldview of, like, 2 different nations. Whereas, like, if you're a purebred Singaporean, you only have the view of one. And honestly speaking, Singaporeans, like, if you just come from one location, you can be seen as very narrow-minded as compared to all the other, international students who have, like, traveled the world, I guess, and who have lived in multiple locations. And so decisions are made within that territory, and there are 3 buckets of Singapore. This is very informal. This is just from what from anecdotal evidence, and just in general from speaking to admissions officers and the knowledge of the process. We have first, okay, I'll just break it down to you first. Target schools. So these are schools where admissions officers actually go down to these schools and give talk. So this means that you're like basically a target school. And so they are expecting to admit 1 student from these 3 schools every year. So that's RI, ACSI, and Hwa Chong. There's non-target schools. So these are non-target schools, we split this of course into local schools. There's the local target schools, RI, ACSI, and Hwa Chong. There's the local non-target schools like SGI, EJ, NY, NJ. And you can include your polytechnics inside here. It's very rare, but there have been unicorn applications to Harvard from polytechnics that have worked out. And the next is international schools. So SGI International is one. I forgot to add this in. UWC Southeast Asia, the Dover campus and the other campus, I can't remember. I just know that they have 2 campuses. And Singapore American High School. So Singapore American High School is a very big feeder, same as UWC SEA. I think if you look at Princeton, like, usually they always take people from UWC. So there's just like a general trend. So clearly, this is one of their target schools. And so the constraint is that, knowing all of this, top Ivies can only take 1 or 2 students from each bucket. So even though you are the best applicant from your school, which is already, you know, and if you know, Singaporean applicants are very competitive. So being the best applicant in your school is already very difficult. You somehow have to be the best applicant in that specific bucket of schools. They call it like your local region in America, like your school group. So like you know how that like it's like the local cluster. Yeah, something along those lines. So it's not just for me applying this cycle. I just can't be the best. It's not just to be the best student in SGI applying, which is already very difficult because SGI is a very strong school. I have to be the best in SGI, EJ, NJ, and Y, and all the polytechnics. That's a very, very, very high bar to climb. And you have to be the only person from your school to go in, basically. That's usually the case. The only loophole is that if they hold different passports, which is what I mentioned, or you somehow have multiple citizenship. Although for Singaporeans you can't have multiple citizenship when you're 18, so that's not really the case. But for example, like if you come from other countries, like let's just say you're from a Hong Kong international school, you could technically hold like three citizenships. You can hold like Chinese, Hong Kong, and like Malaysian, for example. So then that makes you the equivalent of three students and not one. So that's just like a loophole in admissions to make you more stand out. But yeah, and just in general, to go to Ivy League school is really very, very difficult. It's not something that's easily done, and it requires like a lot of things going your way in order to be admitted. So you gotta have I think like good results, compelling narrative, compelling essays, compelling extracurriculars, compelling letters of recommendation, compelling everything, honestly speaking. Now, because at the end of the day, they're only gonna take one. Like Princeton has 11 undergrads for the 4 levels for the 4 years. So freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and there's like 3 Singaporeans every year. And from what I know, if you read, it's like 200 Singaporean applicants every year. So 3 divided by 200 is 1.5%. Those are some very, very terrible odds. And lastly, well, you can sort of skip this competitive pool. It's called early decision. So, and this is mainly if you're seeking financial aid. But if you're not seeking financial aid as well, you should always try to apply early decision. Because regular decision is very fatal. So one of the statistics that was given by Dr. Hoffman was in the ED pool, they split it into 50-50. So they take half the students from ED and half the students from regular decision. So just now I mentioned that they have about 25 need-seeking spots. So if you split like 12-12, that's 12 spots for 200 applicants, which is about a 6% chance, which is already not bad. But then if you go to the RD pool, 12 spots for 2,900 applicants, that's like a 0.42%. And if the Singapore spots were filled in ED, for example, that year, then the bar for RD just becomes higher or maybe just impossible because they don't need a third Singaporean. They don't have. So Swarthmore is a liberal arts college. They have a batch size of 500. They don't have enough space for a third Singaporean. 2 is already stretching it. A third. Even the Ivies don't take. Some of the Ivies like Harvard or Princeton, they don't really have 2 Singaporeans every year sometimes. So what makes a liberal arts college? Why would they take an extra person? So this is something that's really really important to leverage early decision, because if you do early decision, you're basically telling the school that I'm definitely gonna come. So it's like if your candidacy is on like an 80, you're basically telling the school that if you admit me, you're gonna realize 100% of my value. So that means you're gonna admit at 80. Whereas even if when you apply regular decision, the logic is you might be like a 95, but clearly the yield from your school has been about 40%. So it means to say that when we accept 10 people from the school, only 4 will come. So like their chance of realizing your gain is a lot lower. So 90% times like 40% is like 0.36. So that's why ED is so much more attractive for the school and also for the applicant, because you get better chances, your applicant pool is smaller, and the school is able to realize their gains more quickly because like they really locked you in. They really locked you up in that one ED spot. Okay, next is the Singaporean standard. So what this section defines what qualified looks like for a Singaporean applicant. So there's two for Singapore. For local students, specifically for A levels. So unfortunately, being top in your school is not enough. You kind of have to be the top in your country. And I mean, you can be the top 10% in your school, but you might be the top 20% in your country. So this is really I mean, this is if you want to talk about the Ivy Leagues and even to an extent the top 20s, you really, really, really have to be the best. Full stop. There's no exception. There's no going around it because, yeah, an international student, admissions officers want the best and they know that they can get the best. So one thing also that I spoke with the international director about is that admissions officers know the Singaporean education system pretty well. They know the MOE restrictions, which is basically saying like you cannot take two H3 standards. Sorry, you cannot take two H3 subjects. It's subject to MOE approval. And getting two H3 distinctions is like the gold standard, I guess, if you want to be the most compelling applicant, because it shows that you're very intellectually curious and you need like very special approval to have this. Target awards are scholarships, so like your PSC scholarship, your whatever government agency scholarships, and your ASEAN scholarship. So having that as one of your awards on your awards list basically signals to the school that you've been vetted by the Singaporean government. They have given you a scholarship, and also mainly more for need aware schools, like they know that you won't have any problems with funding because the government is funding your education, and so they don't have to worry about that. And for need blind schools, I mean, they are need blind, so they're not really going to give preference. But at the end of the day, like knowing that you have a government backing you is a gold standard. It's a very good signal that this student is a very capable student. On the other hand, if you look at like IB scores, from the rough gauge is about 40. For certain Ivy Leagues like Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, I think like a 42 or like a 43 is kind of the minimum. Anything lower will require like a lot of justification because you need to sort of explain, why did you get 39 and why you should be considered amongst the 40s. And a high total score won't save you if you miss the mark in the key subject. So I think even if you have like a 42, but if you have a 4 in HL math and you're applying physics, engineering, or like anything that's STEM related, your officers will look at that distribution and question whether you're able to do the work here. And it's not just questioning you, it's more just looking at the pool in general. Like everybody who applies has probably like a 6 or 7 in HL math with a 42, with much more well-balanced grades who are applying for STEM. So why should they pick you as an engineering applicant when you have a 4 in HL math, when you have like 100 people with like a 6 or 7? So, your application is basically dead on arrival. Like once the admissions officer takes a good look at it. The next is also school profile. So officers use the school profile as like a cross-reference tool. So it basically just shows the admissions officer how rigorous your courses were. So what it just basically means is that for certain schools, especially JC schools, especially A-level schools, the admissions officers can see that there are like H3 subjects. So if your school offers H3 physics but you didn't take it, and then you are applying with physics or like something adjacent to physics, you are basically not maximizing your the rigor available to you, and you're not outperforming your context. You're just being you're not being average. You're like the top 10%. Maybe you got 90 RP with H2 physics, but there are 90 RPs with H3 distinction in physics, and these are the people that will take your spot, unfortunately. So it's important to show the admissions officer that you took the hardest courses that were available to you. You need to score well in those, and you have to that's how you're going to stand out against all the other applicants. There's also strategic positioning. So this is your major and your profile. I think a lot of people, at least from Singapore and just East Asian countries in general, they apply with CS, engineering, econs is a very, very, very common one. And these majors are very oversubscribed. It's not that you can't get in with these majors. I think you definitely can. But unless you have like world class accolades, like international Olympiad medals and just some, international recognition in these fields, these are often very strategically a dead end. It's not impossible. You can still get in, but especially at the Ivy League, and it's mainly just the Ivy League that all these strategic nuances and all these filters like suddenly exponentially increase. The acceptance rates are like, or to get into like a top and highly selective school is it's an exponential curve. It's very easy. The top 20s are like it's alright. Dartmouth is pretty easy if you apply ED. But once you go to the Ivy Leagues, and even if you apply early, worse regular, it's just very difficult because they have they have choice. You know, they don't need to pick. They don't need so many CS engineering and econ students because they already have so many in their in like the past 4 years. So you're not rare. You're just the norm. They are looking for somebody who is like really different, who like doesn't conform, like breaks the mold of like what they think is a normal Singaporean applicant. And then this is humanities. So um a humanities applicant is definitely in a better position because you are fighting with the Singaporean applicants, but your application is viewed in a different lens because you are more rare. You're not very common. It's not very common that the admissions office will see an anthropology or philosophy major come into the mix, and it's something that they're definitely looking out for because humans want something that they don't have. Admissions officers are the same. They want students that they don't have, and these are the rare students that come by. Maybe like after 200 applicants, maybe you only get 10 applications that are really very different. But you also need to be careful. You can't just purposely change your major. I think then a lot of people would like pick, I don't know, like folklore and mythology in Harvard. They offer that major for some reason. But that's definitely not going to happen. You're definitely going to get rejected because the admissions office and the faculty, they want students who actually fill their classrooms. So when they admit you as like a philosophy student, they are expecting you to take philosophy classes. Of course, you can change in your first year, but that's the sort of expectation that you sort of show to the admissions office. And if you don't have the evidence to prove that you want to be a philosophy and anthropology major, your application is also dead on arrival just instantly because they know, they know. Yeah. Um, that's a very interesting term. So Gemini puts it as the STEM fatigue advantage. So a lot of these were just based on the podcast transcript that I had with Dr. Hoffman, and these are just the summaries. So sometimes there's very weird words that combine, but it's basically a Singaporean who presents a legitimate high-level profile in the humanities or arts, and these students are basically like unicorns, regional unicorns, because they get elevated, they break the regional mold. You're not a STEM student. You're somebody who has probably never even applied. Just humanities or art students are just very rare, especially in the East Asian society. And I mean, you're just so you're just not that common, and schools are willing to take that risk on a humanities student. One thing also is that a lot of these admissions officers, they actually come from a humanities background, so they sort of understand, or they are more lenient towards humanities students. Not saying that you will get admitted if you put a humanities and you can prove that you're a humanities student, but your hill to climb has just gotten less steep. And I always say this phrase, oh, the hill for you to climb is getting steeper and steeper. But in this case, if you're applying as a humanities and art students, your hill finally, like, something is an advantage, and this is one of the advantages if you can prove it well. Uh and also schools are willing to take a risk on humanities students because there's just not so many. They don't need to take a risk on STEM students because, let's be real, every year from Singapore there'll be this one like NUS high student or this one RS student with like 10,000 accolades. The school is just gonna admit that person because they don't need to take that risk. Whereas humanities are a lot more ambiguous. Your sort of contributions and your rankings are very, very personal because the humanities is a very personal sort of like field of academics, and so they are willing to take a risk on you because in general you have to take a risk on humanities applicants, and they are and them having them having that mentality to take the risk on you, sort of opens them up. They're okay if, certain parts of your application might not be as good as like a STEM student because they understand. I mean, you're a humanities student, you're not a STEM student. So they are more lenient in that sense. So another thing is also the standard strong trap. If you are, like a 90 RP student from RI, you are very standard strong. You can do all the work at Harvard. No worries. You can do all the work at Princeton, you can do all the work at Yale, you can do all the work at Stanford, you can do all the work at UPenn. But you're not compelling. You put your foot in the door, but you're not really gonna get through it. Unless you apply ED, unless you're like me full pay applying to UPenn, and like if you're a humanities student, just somebody that fulfills certain institutional priorities, and it's just rare in the applicant pool. You can't apply as a CS student and 50 other people are applying with CS. They're only going to accept one, sometimes even zero. So you have to be the best CS student. And can you really say that you're the best CS student? Most of the time you can't, because there's always going to be someone better than you. 一山比一山高. Oh my god, that's such a bad pronunciation. But like one mountain above the other mountain. So, there's always going to be people that are better than you, and you can't rely on the fact that you're the best unless you have very like solid proof. If not, then you're probably just a standard strong student. Okay, second last is the execution of the application, your essays, your letter of recommendations, and your context. So there's a lot of kiasunas in Singapore. I also fall into this trap sometimes. You always there's this urge to submit additional letters of recommendation, but there is no need to do that. You officers read up to about 100 files a day, or like 80, and each file has 20 pages, by the way. So if they see like 5 additional letters of recommendation, or even just 3, they're not going to read it. They're just going to scan it, and it's just going to be like, there's always this saying in admissions, the thicker the file, the thicker the applicant. So they're just not going to pay attention to it, and it's a net negative rather than net positive. Unless the letters of recommendation are from President Tharman Shanmugaratnam, Lee Hsien Loong, and like Lawrence Wong. Okay, then sure, that's definitely going to help. Then why are you even applying to Harvard at that point? Just be in the Singaporean government, But unless explicitly required, don't submit them. They pass the first optional letter of recommendation, they just hold 0 weight. And especially for Yale, they say 0 optional letters, submit 0. Don't they already say it in their podcast they don't like it when students submit additional information, additional letters, and they made it very clear already. And yeah, just follow what the admissions officers say. Follow their instructions. It's not. I know there's that instinct to want to do more, but it's only going to hurt you, because with 200 applicants every year, 190 people can follow instructions. The 10 who can't follow instructions, it's just so competitive. You don't want to piss your regional admissions officer off by giving them like so many extra things to read, because it's not necessary. One thing also is that Singaporean national school teachers, okay, so this is like local school, basically, they often write a lot of very factual or like laundry list letters. And if you're full pay, you're competing against domestic US applicants. And if you're need-based financial aid student, you're still competing. And the admissions officers see a lot more domestic applications than international. So they will sort of hold your letter of recommendation to that bar. They understand the context. So like in certain countries, like East Asian countries, it's very normal to give like a very factual letter of recommendation. But telling your teacher how to write, like giving them like some videos, or like asking them whether you can give them certain points to write in your letter of recommendation would definitely help, because they don't have the time, they don't know how to write US letters of recommendation, but so if you can't get proper letter of recommendation, or your teacher just wants to write it by themselves, you have to work very hard in your essays to sort of add that human element to you, rather than relying on your teacher. And you don't need a very long letter, as long as it has a lot of like personal anecdotes about you as a person. about your humanity, maturity, resilience, blah blah blah. Whatever personal characters and qualities and traits that you want to highlight. That's fine. You don't need to list out. Your teacher should not be listing out like your awards and like your marks, because the admissions officers have access to your transcript, they have access to your award section that you've written. And if it's not in your 5 award sections, like the award section gives you 5 slots. If you have an award that's not even in the 5 slots, it's probably not important. So your teacher mentioning it isn't really going to make a difference. They're just going to skip. You're just going to skip past it because they can't visualize you on campus. It's like you are third place in a computer science competition, but what does that say about you as a person? It's a holistic, individualized consideration review. They're looking at you as a person. They're admitting the whole person. They're not admitting you for your awards. So it's a very different ballgame. There's also grades. I talked about this in my 3 application mistakes video, but sometimes if a counselor refuses to explain a grade drop in their letter because they're not used to it and it's not normal to do this, then use the additional information section to write it about yourself. For me, it's aspirational grading. Like prelims is always very difficult, and I wrote about that, and I told them to like pay more attention to my final grades where I improved by a lot. But also be careful. Don't use it as like a way to excuse make. Like, oh, just say like, oh, I'm bad at taking tests, or like that day I came late. It's like you came late. It's like that's a you problem. You're bad at taking tests. That's a you problem. That's not a problem with like that's not an external problem. That's an internal problem. So that's just going to reflect very poorly on you. So also just be a bit careful. You can use your additional information section to sort of highlight certain weaknesses about application. So do like an audit on like what's the weakest part of your application, and then use the additional information section to sort of explain it. Okay, lastly, insider mechanics. So how decisions are actually made is that your file is read by like a regional admissions officer specializing in Singapore. Sometimes they can specialize in the Southeast Asian region. So they know the difference between the the A-level, IB, and poly systems. They also use like cheat sheets, and they always go to the school to sort of like understand the grading systems. And so you can trust an admissions officer that they sort of know the intricacies of the system, or at least the surface level intricacies. The slightly deeper, you can't really expect them to know. You have to sort of explain it to them. But you don't need to waste words on explaining what the system is. The admissions officers are familiar. Focus on yourself in this system. How did you perform? And if there's any like additional information that they need to know about your performance. There's also the UWC Davis advantage. So the UWC students have like a $30,000 like Davis Scholars Program. So it creates like a financial incentive for colleges to prioritize them. So it basically just says that like all schools know that if you're a Davis scholar, you basically there's somebody who's funding you like a third of your costs. So they're basically guaranteed that you won't cost like a very big amount to the school. So they are more likely and more willing to risk one of that spots to take you rather than to take someone like me who is non UWC, no scholarships, no very major awards. So that's the difference. Lastly, the hive mind collaboration. So admissions officers are actually very collaborative. They talk within themselves, and this is more so for like extracurricular activities to sort of verify certain things. Like if you start a passion project, but this admissions officer is like, I've seen this passion project before. Did you really start it? So, people think of the Ivy League as like all competing within one another, but that's not really the case. They're more so collaborative rather than competitive, and so just try your best to you can't like lie about certain things like a founder of an organization, but like every year this organization gets refounded over and over again. Admissions officers know, especially if the previous year somebody applied with the same extracurricular and now you're applying, it's very obvious that it's just copy and paste. Lastly, decisions are made by committee. So I didn't really talk about this, but it's admissions committee. So a year is 5 people. and you need 4 yes votes. So they basically, the regional admissions officer, out of like 200 applications, maybe they'll have like 20 that they'll bring to the committee table, and they have like discussions on the application on which students to admit. And maybe like that year they will only admit like 6. So then, they will vote and they'll try and get like 6 students. So 4 yes votes for 6 students. And if need be, there's also the class shaping process. Maybe if they admitted too many people, they'll start removing certain people. Or if they under admitted, they'll maybe there'll be people shuffling in and out of the class, basically, because they need to control for yield. They also need to control for diversity. So they don't want so many CS people. If they admitted 5 CS people, they're definitely going to remove one of them and maybe put in, a humanities student, or like somebody else who comes from a different environment, who can provide a different academic perspective. So that's pretty much it for this video. This is like a deep dive into like Singapore, because I come from Singapore, and I think it's important for me also. It's like my own conscience to sort of explain to other people, how the system works, some of the nuances behind it. And with every video, if there's any questions, you can email me at hello@elitecollegeadmissions.info, or you can see my website, www.elitecollegeadmissions.info. If you ask out any questions, you can comment them down below, and I'll take the time to go and reply them. And that's it for this video. Thank you guys.